This is the second video for Kotter and Schlesinger, but this time the video is looking at how to overcome the change. So in the first video it was considering all the different reasons why there might be resistance to change, but now the two of them have come up with ways to kind of overcome this resistance to help implement whatever the strategy might be or whatever the change might be. So the first way of doing so is education and communication. Now, as I've put here, the starting point for successful change is just to communicate effectively the reasons why change is needed, and this straight away avoids the resistance of misunderstanding and misinformation because the employees now know why this change has to come about, and again, they kind of recognise and understand the need for this change. So honest communication about the issues and the proposed actions helps people see the logic of the change. It might not help with every factor of resistance to change. So for example, if we think about being self-involved again, education and communication might not necessarily help with that. It might help with misunderstanding, but again, it just depends on how the change impacts the individual person. But effective education helps address misconceptions about the change, so again, misinformation, including misinformation or inaccuracies. So education and communication are unlikely to achieve very short-term effects, and they need to be delivered consistently and over a long period for maximum impact. It might also depend on the type of structure of the business. So for example, a flat hierarchy, you could argue maybe the education and communication might be easier to achieve, but with a tall hierarchy with a longer chain of command and maybe that bureaucratic structure, it might be harder to actually carry out. It also might depend on the personality of the leader. So for example, this might not be the way that certain managers act, such as an autocratic leader and someone who's very management-centred. They may not feel the need to do that, but again, they're obviously going to experience the resistance. But in a much more subordinate-centred and maybe more of a democratic or even a laissez-faire, you could even argue paternalistic would try to at least sell the idea. The next one is participation and involvement. So involvement in a change program can be an effective way of bringing on board people who'd otherwise resist. Empower them. If you empower them, they're much more likely to not resist. So participation often leads to commitment, not just compliance. So a common issue in any change program is just how much involvement should be permitted. Delays and obstacles need to be avoided. So again, in a centralised structure, the management team probably wouldn't offer this type of participation involvement because they'd want a swift, a quick and efficient turnaround in this change. However, again, they might experience resistance because of that. But a decentralised structure might find it much easier to do so because they've already developed the staff in certain decision making, and now obviously with this participation and involvement, it'd help them to get on board when obviously carrying out this change. You could also argue, though, does it depend on the type of worker? So, for example, a Theory Y worker would really appreciate this. They'd want to feel trusted within this process. A Theory X worker, even with participation and involvement, they might still resist. So the next one relates more to consultation and also support. So facilitation and support, and what Kotter and Schlesinger identified it as is adjustment problems during these changes. So most people, although not all, will need support in some way because it's fear, I suppose fear of the unknown maybe. And this might relate to those people who have got low tolerance for change. So the key elements of facilitation and support might include additional training, maybe counselling and mentoring, as well as simply listening to the concerns of the people affected. And that's where consultation comes in. And this would be definitely a good way to avoid maybe industrial action as well because of the change, if that's what may have occurred. So if fear and anxiety is at the heart of resistance to change, then facilitation and support could become particularly important. So again, it does depend on the resistance in terms of which method that you choose. And as I said before, the low tolerance to change, this might be the way to do it. Well, this method is more unethical, and you can tell by the title in terms of manipulation. So it's co-option and manipulation. And it's to do with just providing certain pieces of information, and that the certain pieces of information not give the full story of the change, but it might be a way that kind of leads employees into thinking that change is necessary. Whilst the use of manipulation might be seen as unethical, it might be the only option if other methods of overcoming resistance to change prove ineffective. Now, the whole point of this is they probably have tried other approaches already and they haven't worked, so they're kind of going towards their last resorts now. And this might be a way of kind of helping to overcome it. However, if they are found out, and if the employees realise that they have been manipulated, then obviously it's going to really hurt employer and employee relations, and that trust will have been broken. Negotiation and bargaining has more of a monetary aspect to it. So it's in terms of the idea here is to give people who resist an incentive to change or leave. So the negotiation and bargaining might involve offering better financial rewards for those who accept the requirements of the change programme. Alternatively, enhanced rewards for leaving might also be offered. So they might look for voluntary redundancy with good terms, just to completely get rid of the resistance. And it might be only a select few people who are, the bad influences on the workforce. So if you remove them from the picture, it might help the others get on board. So this approach is commonly used when a business needs to restructure the organisation, example, by delayering. Now, the final one is explicit and implicit coercion, and this is the last resort. Okay, so I said with the manipulation that was coming towards the last resort, but this is the final one. And this involves a very a tell attitude, a very management-centred, a very autocratic style of leadership. And they tell exactly what the implications of resisting change will be. It's much more forceful. And so, as it says here, implicit coercion involves suggesting the likely negative consequences for the business failing to change without making explicit threats. Explicit coercion involves people being told exactly what the implications would be. So the big issue with this is it does damage trust, it does hurt employer-employee relations, and it probably does have the consequences of maybe industrial action as well if trade unions are introduced into the equation, because trade unions probably will not like this type of approach either.